Hi, all. This is the February 24th convening of the Vermont Climate Council Steering Committee meeting. And I'm Catherine Morris. I'm sitting in for David Plum, who is in Chile enjoying a holiday. And Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to just welcome folks, and then I'll go over the agenda.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice weekend. And Catherine, thank you for subbing in for David while he's enjoying some time away. And do we have enough critical mass to get started? I don't know the rules of this in terms of participants.
Yeah, we only, it looks like Julie and Jared and Michelle. Those are three steering committee members.
Michelle isn't on the steering committee. I think we're waiting for one more, Kelly.
Okay, so let's
Yep.
let's give it a minute so we can before we get started. Just one correction. We noted in the agenda that it was going to go till 10. It actually will be done by 9. So I'll give you back that hour. And I'd like to suggest that we move the public comment to below to like 8:45. No, 8:50. About then, 8:50. So that that comes after we've completely ended all of our discussion of the council agenda, if that's all right. Anybody have any objections to that? I'm just bumping it down below the strategy to address council input.
Sure.
Thanks. All right. What do we do if we don't get a quorum?
They could still meet. I just don't think they can make decisions. Yeah.
Including approving the minutes, I guess.
Right. Right.
All right, let's give it one more minute or two and see what happens. Can you reach out to Kelly and see if she's coming?
Yeah.
So I don't know how it is in Vermont. I'm down in Baltimore, and we are finally getting above freezing here for the first time in ages. So I'm looking forward to the week.
It is warming up here as well, but unfortunately, we have so much beautiful snow, which is wonderful. And I think we're getting some rain, which I think is not, from my perspective, as wonderful.
Yeah.
Because we have a couple of feet at my house. I'm sure most folks do where they live, but. And it's also, I think for a lot of Vermonters, it's our spring break week this week. So there could be people out because of that as well. A lot of kids are off of school. But.
Hey, Annette, I see your comment. Can we answer that when we get to the public comment? Since we're just sitting here, I'm happy to have it answered, but I don't know the answer to that.
Liz isn't able to make this one, so I just pinged Kelly.
And it is correct that we normally have 6 steering committee members, but Bram was on the steering committee and he is no longer on the council or the steering committee, and that position has not yet been filled by a House appointee to the Climate Council.
Well, how would you like to proceed? For 5 minutes after.
I think we should move forward with the
Yeah.
agenda, Catherine, and just skip over approving the minutes.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I am gonna, I certainly need your input on the council agenda, and we can make changes, I'm assuming, and if need be, is that, I don't know that we need a formal vote or approval of it, but certainly your input would be super valuable.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
I'm gonna go ahead and just share the agenda on my screen so folks could see. So we talk.
Can't see that yet. There you go. So you can see the bulk of our meeting today is just to go over the council meeting, the in-person full day council meeting agenda for next week. And want to talk through the approach we're going to have, and also try to get your input on some of that caveat, that particularly that overarching caveat language that is suggested in the agenda. See if you have some suggestions about how to forward that to the the more we can firm that up, I think that the faster the process will go next week. So want to talk a little bit about that. Liz is going to talk about the approach to the introductory chapters. That's also sort of caveat language that we want you to think about. And then finally, we just want to introduce and confirm our youth, if we have enough people, our youth, what's the word? Youth representative. So with that, let me just I can share my screen and turn to the agenda for, make sure I've got the Word version. Yep. Okay, can folks see that? Let's go back to the top. Is it large enough?
Yep.
So generally, I hope everybody had a chance to read it. The objectives to build a better understanding and agreement around the overall content of the climate action plan that's going to be shared as a public document. So not, far from the final document, but something that can go out. It's good enough to go out for public comment. And then that public comment will obviously come back and be taken in and shape the rest of the final document. Build agreement around the caveat language that I mentioned, and that would be the overarching caveat language, and then go into small groups generally to talk about the specific chapters. There may be some caveat language that you want to bring forward as you review the chapters. Then agree on how the council will apply its decision-making protocol in March. So the question is there more about, we understand what the decision-making protocol is. That hasn't necessarily changed, but how do you want to apply it to what do you want to apply it to specific chapters? Do you want to apply it to the final document as a whole? So we'll talk about that. You will talk about that at the next council meeting. So let me just walk through the proposal that David has laid out here under the methodology. So the focus in terms of the content at that meeting is going to be on the priority actions, and then the chapter introductions or narratives that explain each chapter and sort of the purpose of those chapters. He is suggesting that you break into small groups, all except for the cross-sector actions, priority actions. So you would take that all together and then just break into smaller groups. And each smaller group would look at the same content. So you'll all look at the rural resilience chapter. You'll all look at the agriculture chapter, and then come back after you've reviewed them separately and come in, share your overall suggestions for any changes to those, or any caveats you might want to wrap around some of the priority actions. He's listed here very specifically some of the questions you want to be asking as you move through. Yep, that's it. Some of the questions you want to be asking as you move through those small group discussions. Do I understand them? Are they in good enough shape to share with the public? And in addition to the overall caveat language that will accompany it, do any of these priority actions need additional caveats in the draft? He wants to give you some, real tangible materials just to help ground you in these priority actions. So he's suggesting that they'll have oversized flashcards for each action. And then obviously a printout of all the narratives will be right there with you in the room. And he's developing a worksheet so that you can keep track of any changes or any points you want to bring back to the full group. And this, I think you see I've highlighted in yellow this suggested caveat language, which would be overarching or overall the entire draft. And I'm going to read it as he's just thrown, at least an example of what he thought might work. But I would love to spend some time with you talking through this and see if you can fine tune it to the point where you feel comfortable offering it to the council as the proposed language. The intent is really just to say, this is not the final draft. This is not, we're really still very much in the process of shaping the document. The draft document contains priority actions under discussion by the Vermont Climate Council. The council continues to debate these potential actions and seeks public input prior to making any decisions on them. These draft ideas do not reflect a decision by the councilors who have a range of views on them. I would say views. So that would go in the header of the whole document, perhaps. But certainly we want to make it very prominent and very clear that this applies to the entire document. I'm going to stop there because I think that's, it's important for us just to discuss the approach that David has here and see how you're feeling about it. And then we can talk about the caveat language.
And I'm sorry, I should raise my hand.
Go ahead.
I'm relatively new on the council, and Catherine, I realize that you're pinching in for David, but I'm wondering the last time when we released the plan, the council, do we have similar caveat language for the draft? Does anyone know?
There was language from the last plan that wasn't exactly like this, but kind of similar. And we're actually I'm gonna speak on that afterwards when I talk about the introductory chapters. But I don't know if it was for the same exact purpose, but there was kind of like a footnote of like, we didn't have time for XYZ for the good of the group. We're moving forward on these things for public engagement or something like that. Yeah.
Jared?
Thanks, Catherine. If you can scroll down to the highlighted language, I wanted to make a suggestion or two.
Sure. I was going to hold that until we had
okay.
we sort of had agreement on the overall approach, the small group approach, chapter by chapter, simultaneous in each of these small groups. Does anybody have any concerns about that? All right, well then, yeah, jump in.
I think I would suggest, just for the sake of clarity, adding the words for recommendation after under discussion. So it would read, this draft document contains priority actions under discussion for recommendation by the Climate Council. Because what my understanding of what the Climate Action Plan is it includes our recommendations for priority actions and strategies. The actions themselves are either taken by the legislature or by the administrative agencies. So just to be clear that itself, just that role between the council and other parts of government. And so maybe for that sake of clarity, it makes sense to mirror that language, these potential actions for recommendation in the next sentence. Just want to be clear about, the relationship there, and that these are recommendations. The other thing that may be helpful to clarify is to say something like prior to making any final decisions on them, you know, there have been recommendations that have come up from the subcommittees that are not decisions by the council, but they're recommendations that have come from the subcommittees. And so I think that folks, it's probably, I think what we're really talking about is what is the final content end up in the climate action plan when it's submitted before July 1st. And that will represent our final decision. But there are kind of there's interim progress, interim recommendations, draft decisions, you know, along the way. So I might suggest adding the word final there before decisions in that second to last sentence as well.
Action seeks public input prior to making any final decisions. Got it. How's that sitting with others?
Maybe the word fine, just again for parallel.
These draft
The final before the word decision in that last line do not yet reflect a final decision by counselors.
I'm not sure that first final is needed if you have the second final.
Or just say prior to making decisions on them to get rid of the word any in that second to last sentence.
So get rid of any and final.
I think that, yeah, I was trying
I
to
think so.
follow
Yeah.
up on Secretary Moore's suggestion.
Leave final there. I think that makes sense.
Got it. So I know we don't have a quorum, but of those of you here, would you be comfortable putting this forward as language that the steering committee supports? Just to give it a little more weight and not just something that Dave, so we would change this. So the language may be something like, would probably say, and the steering committee's proposes, just to give it a little more weight for the council. Is that
I
okay?
wonder, Catherine, if with Jared's insertion into the first sentence, if we need to say for recommendation to whom, and I assume it's the legislative and executive branches, but probably important to have that clarity where the recommendations are going.
Mm.
You want to put legislative and executive branches or legislature? Yeah, I guess legislative.
You could say legislature and executive branch agencies, whichever makes more sense.
Let's do that.
I personally am comfortable with this language, and if Secretaries Clark and Moore are as well, I'd be happy saying that, you know, that 3 members of the steering committee were comfortable with this language when we met. I think I'm not comfortable having it be on behalf of the steering committee if we don't have quorum.
Right. Maybe we should just leave it like this then. I mean, I'm not sure that we need to qualify it. But you can speak at the meeting and say, you know, you reviewed it and this is what you agreed to. Any other comments on that?
I'm just kind of going back and forth. We don't plan to discuss the caveat language with the broader council.
No, yes, you will.
Oh,
You definitely will.
but whether, okay, saying that 3 members of the council, the steering committee, support this language, and I would be, and it sounds like Liz later. I'm just curious to see what the other language is that Liz was talking about when I asked my earlier question. But
I could put that in the chat right now too, just so folks could see it.
And we can come back to this if you, I'm just feeling like, you know, we don't have to necessarily say that the steering committee weighed in, but I think you could say that at the meeting.
Yeah, I think our review is really just for context setting for the discussion, not for ending up in the document.
Makes sense.
Okay, well, we're gonna get to that language that you just put up, Liz. Let me just walk through then the rest of this agenda to make sure people are feeling comfortable. We'll get to that specific piece of the introductory chapters. So we have a just transition reflection, which is a summary of public comments received, and I guess Sophie's gonna do that. And there's no specific action other than, you know, sort of taking it in and processing it. At 10:20, there'll be a overview of what was heard or what is going to happen, I guess, in April on the public engagement meetings. Is that right, Liz?
Yeah.
Okay. What the plan is for the public engagement in April. And they're hoping that they will have the council members actually sign up to participate in 2 of them each. David's then going to go over, kind of provide an overview of what this document is that's being prepared for public comment, sort of what's in and what's not in there. That's where he'll talk about this caveat language and try to get that finalized. And the introductory narrative chapters I guess that language will be just overviewed at this point. And you'll take it up within each of these chapter sections that we're going to have. So that, again, the first section on the cross-cutting issues, you'll take as a whole council. He doesn't say that here, but that's what he told me, that you were going to do that as a group. And then you're going to break into smaller groups for the rest of the chapters with those tools and flashcards and all the materials that he's going to have ready. Public comment, 2 minutes a person, up to 20 minutes for that first public comment. Then we're going to go back into breakout groups after lunch again in these other chapters. And maybe before I get to this decision-making protocol, that's where we need to talk about, do you want to talk now about sort of the introductory chapter language and how you want that handled?
Yeah, so could I share my screen actually?
Yep.
Briefly? Okay, thanks. So this is our outline assignment document, and we have these introductory chapters that, so like the climate and climate change of Vermont, health, building equity, and just transition, the economy chapter, and the climate action progress assessment chapter that the council is not going to have time to review these chapters in the same way that they are with the priority action chapters at the council meeting. However, they want to have a route to be able to put this forward in part of the public engagement. And so it makes sense to have some language, like a footnote at the bottom of these introductory chapters that explains that these are initial drafts. And so but wasn't necessarily like fully reviewed by the council, but want to put forward for public engagement. So that's why I included some proposed language in the chat for the steering committee and also for the council to consider, to put as a footnote at possibly like the bottom of these chapters that would be presented in the public engagement for the public to be able to see and engage with. So that's one possible way to move forward with it. But also if the council has other ideas. But that's kind of just the situation with introductory chapters and trying to sort out how to handle that for public engagement.
So this is not the introductory, these are introductory chapters to the overall report as opposed to the introductory language that you'll take up in each of these small groups to each chapter below that, to each section. Jared.
Thanks, Catherine. Liz, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So in the chat, what you put at 8:21, the possible language, that's for the introductory chapters that we're talking about right now, right? The Climate Council
Yeah.
just consented, or the language that is in the chat feels more appropriate to me to chapters relating to recommendations, where we've either had consensus or where there's been disagreement, but people are willing to kind of let the recommendations that have come up from the subcommittees move forward for the sake of getting public input. If we were to use the language that's in the chat for these introductory chapters, it almost makes it sound potentially more contentious than it actually is. I mean, this is really just, as I understand it, context setting, information sharing. And so I wonder if there's something that would go along with, like, you know, the chapters that summarize climate and climate change in Vermont, health, building equity into the CAP, the Vermont climate economy. That's something along the lines of these chapters have been initially drafted by counselors or subcommittee members and are being included in this initial draft for review, but have not yet been fully reviewed or signed off on by the council as a whole to date, something like that. But it's odd to me to use the language of consent or for the good of the group on chapters that aren't recommendation chapters. They're really context and information sharing chapters.
Okay.
And sorry, I was just thinking out loud. I can try to type something in the chat that would be a little bit
Yeah. No, I mean, we could rework some of that to what you just described. And also the council will, like at the council meeting, this will also be discussed, but if we have, like if I reworked that to something that you described, we could share that out at the council meeting for folks to consider.
Because Liz, just for clarification, they will not have a chance to have, other than reading it in advance, you're not going to take time at the upcoming meeting to actually take edits on that. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks like David has prioritized the priority action chapters, the content of those actions, like the ones that correspond with actions to focus at this council meeting. So, yeah, I think what Jared is describing in the sense of like, this was, outlining that we want to move forward it, but maybe just rework some of this language to share with the council. Yeah.
You go ahead and put what you're thinking in specific language in the chat, and we'll come back to it. Any other comments on sort of these introductory chapters and how we handle that? Again, there's not really going to be a time at the meeting for you to review, to provide input, or I guess he might have enough time to just take big red flags. But otherwise it would just be, are you okay with this, just moving forward with this caveat language? No other comments? Okay. So I'm just looking at going back to the agenda. I think the last item on the council agenda is applying the council's decision-making protocol for the draft plan. Here, David wanted me to just bring up with you how he, what he means by that and how he's going to bring this up in discussion. he wants to clarify that the decision making protocol that you have agreed to at the beginning of this updated process is what will be used. So it's the consensus or a fallback voting mechanism. But what he was really hoping to ask at the upcoming meeting is, or suggest is an approach to how it will be applied. Do we apply it to every priority action as we go through? Do we apply it to each chapter? Is the council essentially trying to make decisions and reach consensus on a package of priority actions, which I think is where he's leaning, versus or the final report as a whole, even larger package, or is it I don't know that we're being asked to make a decision here, but is it your idea that, do you have any input on whether or not it should be taken for each a vote needs to be taken, or a sense of consensus needs to be taken for each action? Yeah, Julie.
I do think we have to have some discussion of individual actions. The subcommittees are, while counselors participate in them, many of them don't even have a majority of council members, and I don't feel it would be appropriate to not get into some of the specific recommendations as a council and discuss. I think we probably need the ability to sort of quickly pass over things, or some framework that allows us to highlight different recommendations that require further discussion. But I think it would be challenging for me, and I expect other counselors to act on an entire package without the ability to pull some of the specifics out.
Well, when you say to pull some of the specifics out, are you suggesting that as you move through the final report that you would vote on each priority action then?
I mean, I think we're aiming right for 30 to 40 priority actions. Liz can correct me if I'm wrong. I think each group was endeavoring to bring forward sort of a top 10, or each subcommittee was endeavoring to bring forward something like a top 10. I think we have to discuss each of those. I understand there's many more that follow those. I don't know that those need the same level of attention, and maybe there is that ability to group and offer generalized support. But I think we have to take each priority action individually.
Okay. Yeah, Jared.
I wonder if I'm hearing what Secretary Moore is saying, and there are parts of it that I agree with. I'm just trying to think about the use of time in the meeting and efficiency. And I wonder if it's possible that we consider, the slate of recommendations as a whole, but that if there are specific ones that the counselors want to lift up for discussion and additional consideration, I almost wonder if there is a default that they move forward as a package unless there are specific ones that are identified. Because I think going through a list of 30 to 40 recommendations and discussing each individually would strain our time and agenda. And I think many of them are, very straightforward and non-controversial and consensus-based items. I think that there's likely only a small subset that folks may feel warrant further discussion.
Be comfortable with that approach too. I mean, in some ways, that's the way we did the initial draft review, right? We were given the list of priority actions and asked to flag those that needed further discussion. I don't know if there's opportunity to do that in the next 2 weeks with updated content, but would be happy to do that again. And I agree, Jared. I think there will be some that don't need that kind of discussion, but we've got to figure out a way to pull out the ones that do.
Yeah, that was when I think we used the Survey Monkey possibly to something. Yeah, maybe we do that again.
and ask people to identify or raise those that they feel needs more discussion.
Yeah.
So heading
Yeah.
into the 10th, yeah.
Yeah, before the
Something
yeah.
like that would be great.
Yeah.
So here's where being the substitute is sort of a handicap. I wasn't clear whether or not when he put this on the agenda, he was talking about your decision-making protocol for the, the draft plan after it comes back from public comment and you've developed the next version of it versus applying your decision-making protocol at the next meeting. I guess I thought it was, the draft plan after the public input phase. But in terms of the next meeting, when you come out of the subgroups, it sounds like to me, that's exactly what they'll be doing. They'll be coming out and saying, we were okay with everything in here except these two priority actions. And we would like to we don't want to rewrite them in the moment, but we at least want to acknowledge that we need maybe some caveats noted based on our discussion. I don't know what those caveats look like, but that was my understanding for the next meeting. And it's this decision-making protocol that we're talking about at the next meeting will be to apply it after public comment. David may need to clarify that. And I apologize, Jared.
And I think it's possible that I think it's a good idea to identify a decision-making protocol in advance in the case that it's needed. But I think it's possible it's a moot point because we had identified areas of questions or concern at the last council meeting around priority recommendations and asked those drafting groups to incorporate that feedback into updated recommendations. And so it's possible that those come back fully resolved, and this is really just us kind of in case it's needed. But I do agree that there is an important distinction between a decision-making protocol about what is included in the final climate action plan as recommendations and as chapters versus what we're comfortable with as a council going out for public comment as a draft.
Yeah. Well, let me come back now, Jared, to your comment, to your language for the introductory chapters. You want to just read it out to the group?
Sure. So I had suggested as introductory language or language around those introductory chapters, the following. Introductory chapters have been drafted by council or subcommittee drafting leads, but have not yet been fully reviewed by the full council for final inclusion in the climate action plan. Depending on council and public input, further revisions to these chapters may occur between now and June.
I like that. Any other amendments to that language you'd like to suggest? Others? All right. Sounds like Liz, you have sort of a revised version of that then to
Yeah.
work with.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to public comment, I just want to pause and make sure that I've covered everything. We've walked through the upcoming agenda. One thing I did want to note, this is something Liz and I talked about, is that as you go into these small groups, we'd like to break you up into, not completely random, because we want to be sure that there is at least someone familiar with that chapter in each small group that can maybe answer some questions. So if you're talking about rural resilience, trying to get somebody who's worked on the rural resilience subcommittee in each small group, if we have that luxury. And also to be able to tell folks how they came up with the priority actions. I think there's recognition that not all these priority actions didn't go through exactly the same process to rise to the top. So just making it sharing with the groups as they start their discussion, how you landed on these priority actions. I don't know if that's actually, that just, it's a context setting. That's it. Before you get into the specifics about the actions themselves. Liz, this was your suggestion. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that's support to the drafting too of the top priority actions. Secretary Moore and Jared, do you think that we find that helpful in that process too? Okay, great.
I think so.
All right. Any other questions about the overall agenda? Okay, let's take some public comment. Anybody in the public have want to weigh in here? Or our other council members? Like whoops, I don't know why balloons just went up. I didn't do anything. It's because I've updated my operating system and didn't get rid of that. All right, well, then I think the last item is I don't know, I mean, again, since we don't have a quorum.
I think that could get moved to the next steering committee meeting, and that youth representative is welcome to attend cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meetings in the meantime, though they actually haven't been taking place as of right now. So I think that's okay to wait till we have quorum at the next steering committee meeting to make that appointment.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Well, we finished a little early. And we will come up with a very slightly revised draft, I think, with the changes in the language. Liz, do you plan to put the introductory chapter language into the agenda for the council?
Yeah, we'll add that to the agenda so that the council can consider, and if in case there's any questions at that meeting. But at least we could, similar to the language, we'll be able to say like some steering committee meetings members agree to this language or support this language at the council meeting. Yeah.
Thanks all. Sounds like everybody's comfortable with the approach, and I know David will be working on getting all those materials together and developing in small groups and be ready to go next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Talk to you
Thanks
later.
all.
Thanks.